So welcome everyone to our roundtable ungrading across the disciplines, and thanks to Joe Murphy and all of his colleagues at the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College for organizing this event. Today we've gathered together faculty members and a student assistant from a variety of disciplines at Kenyon College. We were united in our dissatisfaction with traditional grading practices, methods which often felt punitive and tiresome even during the best of circumstances. And as we all know, we're no longer in the best of circumstances if we ever were at all. As a result, we all made changes to the ways in which we evaluate student work based on the concept of ungrading. This term refers to a set of alternative grading practices which aim to increase student agency in the learning process, reduce student anxiety about performance, and improve how students receive and then use feedback. So some of the basic principles behind ungrading, what this generally looks like: increasing student choice by providing multiple pathways to completing a course, employing assessment methods such as completion grading or a kind of goals-based, skill-based grading, or even self-evaluation as opposed to traditional letter grades. So these are, kind of some of the general ideas that you're going to see discussed in more detail today. As you will hear, ungrading can take many different forms and can be applied to a variety of courses in a variety of disciplines, and that's part of what we're hoping to demonstrate. I want to briefly introduce our panelists in the order that they will present. So Laurie Fink is Professor of Women's and Gender Studies. Andrea White is Assistant Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience. And Hannah Haynes is a Senior Psychology major. I, Claire Scott, am Visiting Assistant Professor of German. Orchid Tierney is Assistant Professor of English, and Simon Garcia is Associate Professor of Chemistry. So our goal is to spend about 15 minutes describing what we did, how we incorporated ungrading into our courses. And after that, we'll briefly discuss what worked well, what struggles we had, and then open the floor up for questions. We know that 1 hour is not really sufficient time to cover all the details of this complicated topic. So in order to encourage further collaboration, we've created a Google Doc collection of ungrading resources, which I'll share in the chat after these opening remarks. And I will now turn things over to Professor Fink to start telling us about how she uses ungrading in her courses.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? So I went all in on completion grading. I was looking for three things in thinking over the summer about teaching during a pandemic and teaching remotely, which I did this last semester. I wanted to put some fun into my courses, some social interaction, and I wanted to take the stress off of grading. So I went all in and did what I call completion grading. I simply made both of my courses each worth 100 points and divided those points up among the assignments. And when students completed the assignment, they got points for completing the assignment. I still evaluated them in that I gave them feedback, but I did not assign a grade to them. So for instance, in feminist theory class, there were 100 points in the class. At the beginning of the semester, each student picked 3 feminist theorists and a text by that theorist, spread over the chronological period of the course. They got 10 points for teaching each class. So they taught the classes on the theorists that they had picked. They got 10 points for writing a head note, which was a 5 to 7 page essay that followed a particular protocol or set of questions they had to answer. They got 10 points for revising it. So that's 30 points for each one, for a total of 90 points. And then 10 points for very sort of day-to-day class participation, participating in discussion forums, doing social annotation, things like that. So for a total of, so what this did was it made grading really easy for me because all I had to be able to do was add up to 100 and subtract. So I didn't have to do a lot of weighting and other kinds of things. It made grading faster for me because I didn't have to spend a lot of time justifying a grade. So I was able to focus much more. And I feel like their writing got better because they were repeating, they were learning by repetition a particular genre, and they kept within that genre for the entire semester. And I think that, especially for feminist theory, which is often a really difficult course, it gave them a structure that I think really helped them. I'm going to stop there.
I'm not muted, correct? Okay, you can hear me. So my course was 300 level psychology course, adult development, and I had the good fortune of having Hannah Hayes accompany me in not only helping throughout the semester with the tech aspect of the class, which she was hired to do, but also she really helped me plan the class over the summer in changing it from a traditional class to one that was a lot more flexible and points-based. So we had 1,000 points for the entire class, and we assigned points for each assignment that had already existed in the class already. We just switched it over and made each assignment equivalent to 10 points was approximately an hour of work. And some of these assignments I actually had Hannah try out over the summer to see how long it took her, say, to read a typical chapter and do the work. And we made half of the points required and half were optional or choice-based. And even then we had, so it sounds like there's 500 required points, which there were, but it ended up being more than 500 optional or choice-based questions, because this allowed us the flexibility to add potential assignments throughout the semester if opportunities arose. And for the most part, things were ungraded in that they got points for good faith effort when they completed their assignments. However, there were objective assignments that primarily consisted of the chapter quizzes and exams that were deployed in Moodle. And those accounted for 15% of the required points for the class, but students could also choose to do, if taking quizzes and tests in Moodle was their thing, then they could choose to take all of the chapter quizzes and exams throughout the semester, and that would count for a greater percentage of their grade. Again, a lot of this was designed around choice, which, as someone who teaches also ed psych, this is something that I deploy in that class as well. So I was familiar with using this type of ungrading and allowing for a lot of flexibility and choice for the students, but applying it across the entire class was something I hadn't yet done before. And one of my driving things was the student agency, but also I was really concerned, in prepping for this semester, that we would have students coming in and out of the class, being ill, being quarantined, and missing significant parts of the class and having to make them up later. And so I made almost every deadline a floating deadline so that they could do things as they could. And this, we'll talk about that when we talk about the problems. The other major thing that I wanted to do was to have students be able to access learning opportunities that arose on campus. And I'll have Hannah talk for just a minute about how we did that across the semester and how we kept track of that.
Yes, so we kept track of students' points using a Google Sheets system. So available points that arose during the semester, we had a point key that kept track of all of those, and there should be a copy in the folder that Professor Scott shared. But on the point key, there were dates associated with assignments that were time sensitive and other assignments that didn't have a deadline students could complete at any time. When points were no longer available, they were grayed out to indicate that. And then aside from the point key, each student had their own individual sheet as well, where they had the points that they earned on each optional assignment, plus a link to that assignment. If it were a separate paper or something, if they had gone to see a panel and then written something up, they would include a link to that there. And they would also have a running total of the opportunistic points that they earned throughout the semester as well.
Yeah. So we'll talk more about some of the advantages and disadvantages later on.
That means it's my turn. So I'm currently in the process of implementing ungrading in my intensive introductory German language course, which I taught as a hybrid course this past fall, and will continue teaching as a primarily online course in the spring. It's crucial, I think, especially in a language course, to help students feel comfortable making mistakes. And so in order to facilitate this, I grade homework for completion only. I give students multiple attempts on vocabulary quizzes, and I developed a system for writing and speaking assignments that involves the accumulation of experience points, or XP. So there's a certain kind of gamification idea at play here. At the beginning of each textbook chapter, I give students a list of a variety of activities that they can complete to earn XP. Most activities are 50 to 100 points, and then students need at least 1,000 XP for an A. These activities are due by the end of the unit in terms of at least a first attempt, and they're graded on a check plus, check, and check minus scale, and can be revised as many times as the student wants in order to improve their score. A student's accumulated XP at the end of the semester then translates into a more traditional grade that can be used to assign their final letter grades. And for more information about how this exactly breaks down, you can see the syllabus language that I posted in our Google Drive. And we'll talk some more about what could be improved here shortly, but I'm going to move on to Orchid.
Yeah, thanks, Claire, for convening this panel. So I decided to try ungrading in my in-person sophomore English class, Prosody and Poetics, because it's been my experience that students are typically very frightened to learn how to read poetry. So I wanted to really create a positive learning experience. So even if we weren't in the pandemic situation, I would have probably tried to get students to do self-assessments so that they could actually make mistakes without fear of harming their grade. So just to give a little bit of background, my class was divided into 7 modules, and each module covered essential reading strategies for interpreting poetry or introducing students to the essential elements of poetry, such as trope schemes, scansion, character, point of view, genre, rhyme schemes, and so forth. And at the end of each module, students would do an assessment, a self-assessment that would test their newly acquired skills. So it's basically they assess their level of competency. And the 7 modules also meant that I could drop one if I or a number of students became ill. These assignments were predominantly close reading assignments or in a creative assignment where students had to imitate or create a poem in a particular genre or form. And for creative assignments, they also had to provide a reflection paper on what they did or what they learned in undertaking a creative assignment. And they assessed themselves according to a rubric. Now, I drew elements of my rubric, which I've left in the Google Drive. I drew elements from this rubric from Dr. Rosalie Mitra, who a colleague, Kayer Parsonen, arranged to come virtually to meet with the creative writing faculty in my department. Students graded themselves according to a target, such as I can close read a poem with respect to its schemes, or I can scan a poem. And the target was further broken down into smaller targets that that might focus on things like I can provide correct formatting of quotations, or I can analyze a poem and identify 3 tropes, something similar to that. And students had to identify in a column whether they approached, met, or exceeded a smaller target, or if they provided no evidence. Crucially, and I think this is, I'm really glad that I actually included this into the rubric, was that I included a comment section where students could identify challenges or confusion over any aspect of the module's teaching or the terminology that I introduced. And I found that students would actually write in this section just to express confusion over terminology or concern that they perhaps didn't get a learning goal from that particular module. And then I found that I could actually tailor, because I gave them a lot of feedback. I found that I could tailor specific feedback to that student, or if there were common threads in the comments, I could actually direct my comments to the wider group. I'll also just say that I met with students frequently. We met 3 times in the semester where we could discuss their progress. And in the second and third meetings, they also filled in engagement rubrics, which students could describe how they specifically engaged in the class. And I also stressed minor engagements, because for some, speaking up in class with a mask on was actually very, very challenging. But they could engage and demonstrate their engagement by doing collaborative Google Doc work, or commenting on the polls that I'd set up, or they could do an ungraded quiz, or they could participate in virtual poetry readings that were organized in the college, or they could actually also discuss what kind of thinking that they had done outside of class. And in the final session, we actually met, and we would discuss what grade that they should get, and so that there was a sense that there was a collaborative engagement and an understanding as to what kind of how they achieved the learning outcomes. And we can when we discuss the pitfalls and the advantages of actually doing that. But yeah. I'll pass the baton.
Great. So my audio is on and my video are on. Great. My name is Simon Garcia, pronouns he, him, él, and I teach chemical principles. That's what I taught last semester. Like everyone else, I used a form of completion grading. And I guess one important principle was to separate the process of learning, even assessment, from what was a grade. So as in any course, I assigned activities which can involve readings, calculations, discussion questions, some original research, essay, anything like that was not submitted. It was assigned and students would do it, and that would scaffold the instruction. Instead, there was a separate set of assignments which were templated out and sent out to students through Google Classroom, which were submitted. And those included like preparation for each class meeting and a reflection after the class meeting. And there, I have put examples in the same Google Drive folder, so you can see like what kinds of structure there was to the prompts, but they were fairly standard. I had a separate like spreadsheet that listed specific prompts that I wanted students to get to. But I also gave them some agency in deciding what it is about the learning process they wanted to share with me. Those journal entries were graded based on good faith completion by deadline. So timely completion was the word I used. After the deadline, -1 point. And those were hard deadlines, but instead of floating deadlines to adjust to different situations, I just kind of created this system like this, I call it an entitlement of 6 grace points that a student could use at the end of the semester. The point was for me to spend as little time as possible thinking about deadlines, and for the student to spend as little time thinking about deadlines. Do all that thinking at the end of the semester. Basically, a student who turned in every single journal on time completely the first time was guaranteed a B at minimum for all journal entries. And then additional points came from the portfolio. So the portfolio included a final report and a prospectus that we worked on throughout the semester. Like ORCID, the prospectus is like basically an engagement type of rubric. And like ORCID, we met 3 times throughout the semester to discuss progress on the final report and progress on the prospectus. And also like ORCID said, the portfolio was scored on a specific set of criteria with targets. So that's all I'll say about that.
Okay. I think we're going to move on to some things that worked well. So why don't we just go through again, I think is probably best. And people can talk about what they think worked well.
Would you like me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I loved doing this. I found it so liberating to give up assigning grades. It didn't mean I didn't evaluate them. They got evaluated plenty. And I think what worked best was they had to revise and repeat things a lot. So in the feminist theory class, they were doing the same assignment over and over and over again. In my other class, which is a class on fraternities, the students did a project and they had to turn in something on the project every week for which they got points. And so they were working on the project and, from the beginning and revising things all the way through the semester. They were also constantly getting feedback from me. So because they were turning things in all the time and getting things back all the time, it was almost like they were coming to office hours every week. So in the fraternity class, the students got some feedback from me about their project every week. That was a lot. It was a lot of grading, but what happened is because I didn't have to assign grades, I found the grading went much more quickly. And it was much more organic with the writing process. So we spent a lot of time talking about the writing process and how our minds work when we're trying to write. And one of the things that I was really impressed in the feminist theory class, which is a class I'm always disappointed with the student work in it, because it's a very difficult course, is they really got the content this time. Some of it was because they had to teach it, and some of it was because they had the opportunity to come back and revisit things over and over again. So I was really, really pleased with, first of all, their engagement was, for a remote class, was amazing. And that was something I was really proud of.
So I would guess the things that I took away as some things that worked really well is that there were so many different learning opportunities that came across the semester that I could then, I think, I forget the terminology that Simon used the other day, but if we value something, we should assign some points to it or assign some credit to it. And so there were many things, of course, that the college puts out that they would like students to do, and we're supposed to encourage students to do them. And I could pay them with points to do that. And if it was something, that they wanted to do, then, that was even better. So to have them take advantage of as many opportunities that arose as possible that were connected to course material, right? So that was worked into the assignments. And it turns out that the course ended up being successful in that, possibly too successful. So I hope that my colleagues who evaluate me are okay with this, but I ended up having so many points available and that everybody completed more than 100% of the points that were possible. And I struggled to put limits on that, but everybody earned more than 100%. So legit, I gave everybody an A+. So that felt a little weird, and I didn't quite pull that all together or figure it out until the very last week of the semester that was coming down the pike for everybody. So that happened, which was good, right? So that meant everybody did a significant amount of work and was successful that way. So, and I'm going to turn this over to Hannah because she did a little recon to poll some students to see what they thought were some good aspects. So.
Yes, so the students that I polled, one of them mentioned that she felt that using this system helped her work on, enhancing her ability to take initiative, and she felt really accountable for all of the work that she was doing, since she had to, do the assignment and then physically input the points that she earned doing it onto the point sheet. Another student also highlighted the convenience of being able to work on any assignment at any time, which granted a lot of flexibility throughout the semester, and also mentioned that they felt a lot less stressed out going into quizzes and the objective assignments that were graded, since there would be opportunities to earn more points later on. So those were the main student perspectives that I gained on the pros of the course.
Great. So in terms of my system, what seemed to work well was giving students choice about the types of activities that they wanted to do, and thereby hopefully freeing them from some of the fear of making mistakes. Grading in this way also makes me feel that I'm grading students' language more holistically. Sometimes it feels very punitive to take off points for an incorrectly conjugated verb when that's a mistake that even a so-called native speaker would make. I think, we know this, all speakers of languages make mistakes from time to time. And when we learn a new language, there's this pressure of perfection or something like a native speaker status that ends up somehow being the goal, even though that doesn't really make sense to have that as a goal. And that can be really intimidating to learners, and it's just not a fair or accurate way of thinking about language use and communication. And so grading in this way makes me feel like my course aligns more with what it actually means to speak a language.
Yeah, I'll answer this twofold. For myself, I found this really liberating because it felt clear. It felt like I could approach students holistically, looking at where they began and where they ended up at the end of the semester. And it was so wonderful to sort of see. I saw substantial improvement across the board in all my students, from those who were novices to poetry to those who actually had substantial ability already in poetry because they were poets or they had prior experience, and they all sort of ended up progressing according to their abilities, and that was just really wonderful to see. More and really importantly for me, and to answer it from the student perspective, is that students feedback that they really appreciated ungrading because it gave them, as others have mentioned, agency. It took off the pressure for reaching for perfection, but it also gave them permission to experiment and fail. And to learn from mistakes. I don't think that's something that I think that's something that we should be encouraging as students, to make mistakes and to try again and again and again. And many of my assignments had a recursive element. So they had that opportunity to make a mistake and then learn from the error and try again. And it was, they really did, and the feedback, and the class feedbacks, they really appreciated the removal of the grade to the focus of the evaluation. And it gave them a lot more leeway to explore, to try new things, and to think outside the box. And as a result, I feel that a lot of them came at the end of the semester were actually had a positive experience in poetry. And that's essentially what I was hoping them to gain at the end of it. So.
I want to really highlight the liberating aspect of this. Liberated me and also the student. From these kind of external but insidious connections between your self-identity and your self-valuation and someone else's perception of you and someone else's judgment of you. So I really like that aspect of it. I also really love the metacognitive aspect of it. So both the activity of metacognition, in that the journal entries were valued and therefore structured to encourage metacognition. Students had to choose, what is it from the activities that I wrote down do I want to include in here? What do I think is really important? I got to see from the student what that is. It's like having a minute paper, every single class, which gave me this incredible insight whenever I looked at all the different responses together. I could see themes, I could see different mistakes or misconceptions expressed in those minute paper prompts, and then I could address them in the next class. So that part was really nice. I also liked being able to kind of have a consistent way of valuing community building. So that's a big part of my courses, is the building of community, making contributions to discussion, acknowledging other people's contributions to discussion, creating humane and inclusive environments. And if you look at some of the prompts, you'll see that some of the prompts, they ask who is in your group, what's their name and pronouns. Don't just say the person in my group, like find out their name every time you're in a group. And then tell me something unique about something they said or did in the discussion that enhanced it. So like, I want to really create these connections and let students know that they were being valued for valuing other people, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we'll go through one more time and have people share difficulties that they encountered and things that they might do differently. So we'll start with Laurie again.
Deadlines. Every time I try to ease up on deadlines with students, I regret it. So in the feminist theory class, they had these 3 head notes they had to do. And the idea was they would do a draft of the head note, and then I would give them feedback and they would write it. So they teach their class. And my idea was they would turn in their draft about a week after they taught their class. And then at the end of the semester, I gave them a couple of weeks where they could just do the revisions of all their head notes. Well, because I didn't actually make those firm deadlines, most of them ended up doing all 3 of their head notes at the end of the course, rather than, spread out over the course of the semester. So I do feel like even though deadlines seem like a punitive old school kind of way of teaching, one of the things I get about students is it's not that they're lazy, it's that they have priorities. And so they sit down and look at what they have in a week, and they're looking at what's the next thing that's due. What do I have to get in? And if your thing isn't due, it goes to the bottom of the list. And I get that because I do it too. So I do feel like if I were doing that again, I would give deadlines. Interestingly enough, all the students in the feminist theory class got A or A- in the class. They all completed everything. The other class, which had deadlines every week, the grades ranged from A to C, because there were some people who just simply didn't do things. And the contract was, you don't do it, you don't get the points. So I had a couple students who were writing their entire project. One was in the last week of the class, another one was in January. So they did not get out of the course what other students who were following the scaffolding that I was so carefully doing got out of it. So deadlines.
So that's a good place for me to jump in terms of deadlines. Very few things in the class had a deadline. And I did it that way intentionally, again, thinking that students were going to be dropping in and out, and I was going to have this massive amount of flexibility. And so that, all things sort of came to a head in early November when my parents left after being here for 6 weeks and helping with the homeschooling, digital schooling of my own children, and then that falling back again on me and my husband. And then I was very intentional, though, across the whole semester, that whenever anything got really stressful with my own kids' education, that I give some grace to the students in the class, in my classes that I'm teaching, right? So how can I ease up, or how can I make things better for them? And that wasn't always, to be flexible on a deadline. Right. So in early November, students were not making the progress on some of the things I wanted them to make progress on, or that I thought they needed to make progress. And I couldn't exactly, drop a deadline in there all of a sudden. And genuinely, some of the projects that were available were things that you couldn't really do until you had done several chapters in the book. And you had, they were designed to be semester-long projects, but I had a suspicion that students weren't actually working on them. And so I ended up dropping from 1,000 points to 900 points, what it would to reduce the overall burden on students of getting all of these points. And simultaneously, I attended a CIP workshop on social annotation and thought it was great. And so we did an in-class social annotation together. And then I said, hey, since I want to value this going forward, let's drop some points on it. If you want to do social annotations of the chapters that remain, then I'll give you points. And I ended up giving too many points for those social annotations, and students could pick up a significant number of points for that. Probably over credited that. But I have to say, and I asked Hannah to look in on some of these that were available to maybe give some examples. I don't know if she's actually prepped them, because we didn't talk about that specifically for this class, but the social annotation comments that students chose to do when they did them quite good. So that was good. Hannah, do you want to come in with some pitfalls that I
Yeah,
might not have mentioned?
definitely. First, to address the social annotation that you mentioned, students really seem to engage with it and would sometimes like reply to each other and that sort of thing. So that kind of went into the building of the community as well. But the students' kind of pitfalls of the course seem to reflect what Professor Fink and what Professor White have said, which was the deadlines, where they felt more pressure towards the end of the course, having to complete more points than they had planned, and like hadn't really budgeted time quite so well. So that seemed to be the main pitfall there. So I can hand it over to whoever's next.
All right. So in the fall in my course, I still gave traditional assessments or more traditional assessments each chapter, in addition to these writing and speaking assignments. And I found that even in an intensive course, this ended up being overly burdensome to the students and also to me, particularly in terms of writing those assessments. And so my plan is to eliminate that for the coming semester, because it seems like I'm testing the same things then over and over again, and that that doesn't seem productive for anyone. That being said, the structure of the intensive language model here requires a cumulative final exam at the end of our year-long course. So I'll probably add a low stakes midterm exam in order to just familiarize students with the format that final exam will take. But I think I currently have that, only as, worth 5% of their grade. So it's a fairly low stakes kind of thing, where the students will hopefully just get a sense of where they are, get a sense of what the format for that final exam will be. But that will be kind of the only elements of formal assessment in the course. The other piece of this puzzle that I'm not convinced about is vocabulary, in terms of students being able to incorporate words into their active vocabulary through the system. I don't think that students are cheating on the quizzes because I give them multiple attempts, but I do think that students are not studying the vocabulary words in such a way that they are able to incorporate them into their active vocabularies. So it's kind of, reviewing the list right before they take the test. And so it's only in their short-term memory. And so one of the things that I'm going to try to do to combat this is, and then this is something that people have talked about, we've talked about already today in terms of study skills and, strategies. So I'm making the Friday sessions of my course for at least the first 4 or 5 weeks of the semester purely devoted to study strategies and tips for language learning. So we're going to hopefully, kind of go in and talk about how do you study vocabulary words. And I think that this is, something that is related to ungrading, but also related to inclusive teaching practices in terms of not assuming that students know how to study for a particular course. I'll pass it over to Orchid.
Yeah, I didn't have fixed. I had fixed deadlines, but students knew that if they needed a deadline, they needed an extension, that they could just ask me, and I would just grant it, no questions asked. And I didn't have any. I think there was a couple of occasions throughout the semester where students requested an extension, and that was fine, and everyone managed to get their work in a timely manner. I think, just to anticipate, one of the critiques that I might get is like, well, how do I deal with students who undergrade or overgrade themselves? And that was something that I was very, 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 very conscious of. Fortunately, I didn't have any students who overgraded themselves. But I did have about 3 students who undergraded themselves. And when we met at the final session to discuss their grade, they placed themselves in the B range, whereas, at least for one student, I really felt that they were in an A place range. They had done a marvelous work, and I had seen a substantial increase. And so we actually ended up discussing as to why they felt that way. And I would gesture to their work that they had done, in order to sort of push them to sort of identify where they had actually made some had made a progress, and some of them still didn't really see that they had. They still failed to identify the progress that they had made. But I think this is where the actual meeting thrice actually helped substantially, because I was actually able to continuously feedback on the kinds of progress that they made. And so there were only like a couple of instances where I actually pushed students to actually get a larger grade, but most of them actually were able to put themselves into the correct bracket, the bracket that I felt that they were actually in. But it would be, I would love actually to hear feedback as to other strategies that I might sort of pursue for students who perhaps would overgrade themselves. But I think it is worthwhile, sort of, particularly for certain demographics, they may actually end up undergrading or overgrading themselves. And it would be sort of worth, if doing self-assessments, it would be worth thinking about how to help students correctly identify their progress, so that they're not underperforming or overperforming.
So I'll split my comments into two categories. One is things I would definitely do differently, and the second would be just like things I think might be problematic, but which I don't see a problem with it. Anyway, so I'll start with things I would do differently. The first is that the journal entries, because they were individual assignments, they didn't form a narrative throughout the entire course that a student could look at their own and just kind of see growth, perhaps. So one thing I would do differently is find some way to, I believe it is possible to program Google Documents to kind of like pull out multiple documents and just kind of collate them into one. So that's something I will work on. I would really like the student to kind of walk away with like this document, kind of like a log of all the things that they did. So they could say, you know, I got an A or B or whatever in this course, and here's the evidence of all the work I did in this course. Second thing I would do differently has to do with the grace points. I required students to ask for those explicitly because it was part of the idea of agency, of them asking for it. But I don't know if this is a strong correlation, but I did notice that many students of color would not ask for it, even if they were entitled to it. Even after I told them, you are entitled to this, all you have to do is turn in a request. So next time I will just make it automatic, because I don't. There are reasons why many students just won't, because it's embarrassing, or they just don't feel they deserve it, and that's unfortunately gendered and racialized. So that will become automatic next time I do this. A few things that might make this seem problematic, and I will acknowledge that other people will find it a problem. The first is that students can make a deliberate choice to spend less time on my class. Some people think this is a terrible thing, and I think it's wonderful. Again, has to do with the agency. A student can choose, okay, I've got 6 grace points. Each late assignment only affects my grade by 1/6 of a letter grade. And that's a choice I'm willing to make, because this is not the most important class, or maybe not the most difficult class, or just not the class I'm passionate about. And I think that's a legitimate decision that I want to respect. So I don't like the idea of using grades to kind of like force a student to pay more attention to my subject than others, or even as much time to my subject as others. And correspondingly, many of my students got A's and A+, but not all of them did. Some got C's, and these are preventable C's. And they were C's that the student knew about, and like they just decided that was okay. The second problem, again, it's a problem that it requires more labor from the instructor, but it's labor that I think is worthwhile. So you really have to monitor whenever, like situations when you see a string of late or missing assignments, because those can build up really quickly over time. But to me, that's good, because it focuses your attention on students who need it the most. When a student is in that situation, right, this is like an early warning sign that the student is dealing with something. So I had a student who had to go back home during Thanksgiving, back to a home that was so when I say home, I don't mean like their actual home, just like their home country. which was, I won't go into details because it could be identifying, but they were going through a lot. And I would not have known that because it wasn't on my radar until I started seeing these missing assignments showing up. And so that prompted me to tell me, okay, I need to spend extra time checking with the Dean of Students and the Dean of Academic Advising on like what could be the reason why the student is not replying to emails and why their assignments have gone missing.
Okay. Well, I will stop screen sharing, but the PowerPoint is also available in the Google Drive. So I'll share that once again in the chat. And I think we'll open the floor up to questions. Thanks, everyone.